The dinner table gleamed with polished silverware and untouched plates, but no one moved. My children sat across from me, their eyes sharp with determination, a manila folder pushed toward my place setting. "Mum," Matthew said, voice heavy with rehearsed authority, "we've decided it's best for everyone if Aunt Marjorie takes over management of your clinic. You'll still receive a share of the profits." The word share twisted in my chest like a knife. My daughter Brianna smirked as though she were finally claiming a prize long denied. I took a slow sip of water, placed the glass gently back on its coaster, and then, without a word, reached into my leather case. The crisp sound of a zipper echoed through the silent dining room. From it, I withdrew the original agreement, the one they thought I had forgotten. "Clause 4.3, I said, my voice steady as steel. "No family members may assume management without unanimous board approval. And since I hold majority stake—" Matthew froze mid-sentence, his fork suspended in the air. The confidence drained from his face. Brianna's smirk vanished. My sister's hands trembled. For the first time in years, I held the silence. Not them. No one. Touched their food afterward. I still remember the day I signed the lease on that tiny room with the water-stained ceiling. It was 1992, and Raleigh was growing, but not fast enough for most people to believe a woman on her own could build a successful rehabilitation clinic. The landlord, a gruff man with nicotine-stained fingers, had laughed when I told him my plans. "Physical therapy, huh? Fancy? Name for massage, ain't it?" He'd winked, and I'd felt my cheeks burn with a mixture of rage and determination. 6 months later, I had my first 3 regular clients. By the end of that year, there was a waiting list. I worked 14-hour days, slept on a cot in the back room, and ate whatever was cheapest at the grocery store. But Langston Rehabilitation and Wellness was alive, and so was my dream. Matthew was 10 then, and Brianna 8. Their father had left us 3 years earlier for a dental hygienist in Charlotte, his child support payments as inconsistent as his promises to visit. The kids spent afternoons at the clinic after school, doing homework in the corner while I helped people regain movement, freedom, dignity. "Why do you work so hard, Mom?" Matthew asked one evening as I massaged a trucker's damaged rotator cuff. "Dad says you're just too stubborn to admit you need help." I didn't break rhythm in my therapeutic movements, but something in my chest tightened. "Because this isn't just work, sweetheart. This is our future." What I didn't say was that it was also our present, the only thing keeping us from moving back in with my parents, from the pitying looks of relatives, from the whispers about poor Rebecca and those children. Every dollar I earned was freedom. Every client who walked out standing straighter was validation. Every new piece of equipment I could afford was a promise kept to myself. My sister Marjorie never understood this. She'd married well at 22 to Richard, an orthodontist with family money, and had never needed to build anything from scratch. When she visited the clinic, she'd wrinkle her nose at the second-hand furniture and suggest improvements that always involved spending money I didn't have. "Becca, darling, you really should hire a proper receptionist," she'd say, eyeing Karen, my first employee who'd agreed to work for less than market rate because she believed in what we were building. "Someone who looks more professional." Karen, who'd stayed late countless nights helping me file insurance claims when I was too exhausted to see straight, would just smile thinly and continue typing. She knew what Marjorie didn't, that loyalty isn't bought, it's earned through respect. By the time the children were teenagers, the clinic had expanded to a suite of rooms. I'd hired 2 additional therapists, added specialized equipment for sports injuries, and developed a reputation for extraordinary results with difficult cases. But success brought its own complications. Matthew and Brianna had grown accustomed to the lifestyle my hard work provided, the private school I insisted they attend, the extracurriculars I never questioned paying for, the clothes and gadgets that kept them from feeling different from their wealthier friends. "Mom, can I have $200 for the ski trip this weekend?" Brianna would ask, not even looking up from her phone. "The Henderson girl is getting a car for her 16th, Matthew would mention casually. Just saying. I gave when I could, prioritizing their needs and wants over my own. My wardrobe consisted of practical slacks and blouses suitable for work. My own healthcare needs were addressed last, if at all. My retirement account remained embarrassingly small, while I funded their educations, their opportunities, their futures. When Matthew announced he wanted to study business at Duke, I remortgaged the building I'd finally managed to purchase for the clinic. When Brianna needed emergency dental surgery, I covered it without hesitation, cancelling. The vacation I'd been promising myself for years. "You spoil them," my mother warned during one of our rare lunches together. "Children need to understand the value of money, of hard work." "They'll learn," I said confidently. "They see me working every day." What I didn't realize was that what they were learning wasn't about work ethic or sacrifice. They were learning that Mom would always provide, that Mom's resources were inexhaustible, that Mom's success was a family entitlement rather than a personal achievement. The first real warning came during Matthew's final year at business school. He'd called late one night, his voice slurring slightly from what I assumed were graduation celebrations. "Mom," he'd said too loudly into the phone, "I've been thinking, when I graduate, I should come run the business side of the clinic. You know, modernize things." "That's sweet, honey," I'd replied, "but the clinic's doing just fine. Karen and I have systems in place that work well for us." There was a pause, then a chuckle that didn't sound like my son. "Mom, no offense, but you're still running things like it's the 90s. You need someone with actual business training." I'd brushed it off as youthful arrogance, but something cold had settled in my stomach. It was the first time I'd heard that tone from him, condescending, entitled, dismissive. A month later, Brianna dropped by the clinic unannounced. She wandered through the treatment rooms, eyeing the space with an appraising look I'd never seen before. "You know, this place has potential," she said, running her finger along a countertop. "With the right management, this could be a chain. Marjorie was saying she knows investors who might be interested." I stopped what I was doing, updating a patient file, and looked at my daughter carefully. "Marjorie's been discussing my business with investors," Brianna shrugged. "Just casually. She thinks you've hit the ceiling of what you can accomplish on your own. We all do. We all do." 3 words that revealed how many conversations had happened without me, about my life's work. That night I called Karen. We met at a diner far from the clinic, and I told her everything. Karen, who had been with me for 15 years by then, wasn't surprised. "Rebecca," she said, using my full name as she only did in serious moments, "it's time to protect yourself. So I've seen how they look at this place when they visit. Not with pride, with calculation." The next day we met with a lawyer. I restructured the business, created a formal board, and documented everything. Every free treatment I'd provided to family members. Every loan I'd given that was never repaid. Every hour I'd worked without compensation to keep the doors open. Clause 4.3 was Karen's idea. No family members may assume management without unanimous board approval. Simple, clear, protective. I signed the papers with a mixture of sadness and resolution. I never wanted to use these protections. I hoped I would never need to, but as I filed them away in my office safe, I couldn't silence the voice in my head that whispered, "Prepare for the day your children see you not as their mother, but as their opportunity." 3 years passed after I signed those protective papers. Matthew graduated and took a job with a consulting firm in Charlotte, not the position he wanted, but one that paid well enough to support his taste for designer suits and weekend trips to Charleston. Brianna finished her marketing degree and bounced between jobs in Raleigh, never quite finding her footing, but always confident that something better would come along. The clinic continued to thrive. We expanded our services to include specialized pediatric therapy, which brought in a steady stream of new clients. I hired 2 more therapists, renovated the reception area, and even won a local business award. At 55, I was finally starting to think about what my own future might hold. Perhaps cutting back my hours, taking a real vacation, even dating again. Then came the first real attempt at infiltration. It started innocently enough. Matthew called on a Tuesday evening, his voice warm with unusual enthusiasm. "Mom, I've got some vacation time coming up. I thought I might come home for a couple of weeks, maybe help out around the clinic. You know, give you a break." Something in his tone made me pause. "That would be lovely, honey, but you don't need to work during your vacation." "I want to," he insisted. "Besides, it would be good for me to understand the family business better. The family business, not your business or the clinic." The shift in language was subtle but unmistakable. When he arrived the following Monday, he didn't come dressed for casual help. He wore a crisp, button-down shirt, slacks, and carried a leather portfolio. He greeted Karen with polite distance, then proceeded to walk through the clinic like a health inspector, making notes and asking pointed questions about our billing processes, patient retention rates, and marketing strategies. "You know," he said over lunch in my office, "you could increase revenue by at least 30% if you implemented a few simple changes. Your pricing structure is practically charitable. I set down my sandwich. Matthew, our pricing is fair. Many of our patients are on fixed incomes or dealing with insurance limitations. He waved his hand dismissively. That's exactly the problem. You're thinking like a healthcare provider, not a business owner. I'm both, I said firmly, and I'm proud of it. That afternoon, I caught him in my office, going through files on my computer. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled with practiced innocence. Just trying to understand your system better. Did you know your accounting software is totally outdated? I could set you up with something more modern. I thanked him, but declined. That night, I changed all my passwords. The next phase came from Brianna. She showed up at the clinic one day with mock-ups for a brand refresh. Mom, your logo looks like it's from the last century, she said, spreading design concepts across the reception desk where patients could hear. And your website is practically prehistoric. I've drafted some ideas for a complete rebrand. Marjorie thinks it's exactly what the place needs. Marjorie thinks, I echoed, noting how Karen's head had snapped up at the mention of my sister. Brianna nodded enthusiastically. She's been amazing, actually. She knows this branding consultant who's worked with major healthcare providers. He could transform the clinic's image. For a fee, I assume, I said dryly. Brianna had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Well, yes, but Marjorie said she'd cover the initial. Consultation as a gift to you. A gift, as though my sister's interest in my business was generosity rather than interference. The final piece fell into place when Marjorie herself began appearing at the clinic. First for sisterly lunches that always seemed to involve tours of the facility. Then for impromptu visits where she'd chat with staff about their career goals and ideas for improvement. She brought cookies for the break room and coffee for Karen, who accepted with a smile that never reached her eyes. One afternoon, I returned from a meeting with a medical supplier to find Marjorie in my office chair, showing a contractor around. Rebecca, perfect timing, she exclaimed, standing up with practiced grace. I was just discussing some possible renovations for the therapy rooms. Mr. Dennison here has done wonderful work for several medical practices. I maintained my composure, introduced myself properly to the contractor, and then asked for a moment alone with my sister. Marjorie, while I appreciate your interest, I don't recall discussing renovations. She laughed, a tinkling sound that had charmed people since we were girls. Oh, it's just preliminary. I thought it would be a lovely surprise. Richard and I have been talking and we'd like to invest in the clinic, help you take it to the next level. The clinic isn't looking for investors, I said evenly. Something flickered across her face. Annoyance, quickly masked by concern. Becca, darling, you work so hard, too hard. Wouldn't it be nice to have partners, to share the burden a bit? I don't consider it a burden, I replied, and I'm not interested in partners. She patted my arm condescendingly. Just think about it. The children are concerned about you working yourself to the bone. We all are. After she left, Karen appeared in my doorway, her expression grave. They're moving pieces into position, she said quietly. You know that, right? I nodded, a heaviness settling in my chest. They think I'm too tired to fight, too sentimental to say no. Are you? Karen asked, her loyalty giving her the right to such directness. I thought of the decades of sacrifice, of sleeping on clinic tables and eating ramen while my children attended private schools, of covering Marjorie's wellness treatments, and my father's shoulder rehabilitation without ever sending invoices. No, I said finally. I'm not. That night I called my lawyer again and scheduled a meeting to review the protections we'd put in place. I transferred documents to secure storage. I documented every instance of interference, every suggestion of takeover, every uninvited consultation. And I waited, knowing that they wouldn't be content with subtlety for long. Entitlement grows hungry with time. Soon, they would make their real move. When my mother called to invite me to a special family dinner, just immediate family, dear, Matthew's coming in from Charlotte especially, I knew the moment had arrived. The evening before the dinner, I carefully packed my leather case with the documents I'd prepared years earlier, hoping never to use. I added recent financial statements proving the clinic's value had doubled under my continued management. I included photos of the original space, the water-stained ceiling, the second-hand furniture, the dream only I had believed in. As I zipped the case closed, I felt not anger, but a profound sadness. How had I raised children who saw my life's work as their inheritance rather than my achievement? When had my sister's admiration turned to envy? More importantly, when had I become someone they thought would surrender without a fight? The evening of the family dinner arrived with the polished perfection that always characterized my mother's entertaining. Her colonial-style home in the historic district of Rayleigh, the home where Marjorie and I had grown up, was lit softly from within. Seasonal flowers lined the walkway, and the air was scented with something comforting and familiar. Pot roast, I realized, my favorite childhood meal. A calculated choice, no doubt. I parked my Volvo behind Matthew's sleek BMW and Marjorie's Range Rover, taking a moment to gather myself before heading inside. The leather case sat on the passenger seat beside me, its presence both reassuring and disappointing. I had hoped never to need it. There she is. My father's voice boomed as I stepped through the front door. He pulled me into a warm hug, his familiar scent of aftershave and pipe tobacco momentarily transporting me to simpler times. At 78, he moved more slowly than before, but his grip was still strong, the legacy of a lifetime working with his hands as a carpenter. "Hi, Dad," I said, returning his embrace. I searched his face for signs of complicity in whatever was planned for tonight, but found only genuine pleasure at seeing me. Perhaps he was as much in the dark as I had once been. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an embroidered apron. "Rebecca, you're just in time. Everyone's in the dining room." As I followed her through the house, I noted the subtle upgrades since my last visit. New curtains, a refinished hardwood floor, a painting above the fireplace that hadn't been there before. My parents lived comfortably on my father's pension and the investments they'd managed to make over the years, but these touches spoke of additional resources. I wondered how much Marjorie and Richard had contributed and what promises had been made in return. The dining room was a tableau of deliberate staging. My children sat on one side of the table, Marjorie and Richard on the other. The head of the table, my father's usual place, was conspicuously empty, while the foot of the table was set with my mother's best china and crystal. "Mom!" Brianna stood and air-kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. Matthew offered a tight smile, but remained seated, one hand resting protectively on a manila folder beside his plate. "Rebecca," Marjorie nodded while Richard adjusted his tie nervously. He had always been the least comfortable with confrontation in the family. "I thought we'd try something different tonight," my mother announced as I took my seat. "Your father will sit beside me, and Rebecca, you take the head of the table." A position of honor, ostensibly. In reality, a strategic placement ensuring that I faced all of them alone. The first course arrived, my mother's famous butternut squash soup, and conversation remained superficial. Weather, traffic, a new restaurant downtown that had received favorable reviews. No one touched the business folder on the table, though Matthew's hand never strayed far from it. It wasn't until the main course was served that he finally made his move. "Mum," he began, his voice carrying the practiced tone of his business presentations, "we've been talking as a family, and we've come to an important decision." I took a small bite of pot roast, chewed thoroughly, and swallowed before responding. "Have you now?" Matthew glanced at Brianna, who nodded encouragingly, then at Marjorie, who gave an almost imperceptible dip of her chin. "We've been concerned about you," he continued. "You're working too hard, taking on too much stress with the clinic. You're not getting any younger and—" "I'm 55, Matthew, not 85, I interjected mildly. He cleared his throat. "Of course, what I mean is you've built something incredible, but it's time to think about succession planning. The future of Langston. Rehabilitation and wellness." "I see," I said, taking a sip of water. "And what does this succession planning entail?" He pushed the manila folder toward me. "We've drawn up a proposal. Aunt Marjorie would assume management responsibilities for the clinic, bringing in her business expertise and connections. You would maintain an advisory role and receive a generous share of the profits." There it was. That word again. Share. As though my own business would now portion out crumbs to me. I didn't touch the folder. "And what qualifies Marjorie to manage a specialized physical therapy practice?" Marjorie leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. "I've been consulting for 3 medical practices through Richard's connections. I understand the healthcare space quite well now. Plus," Brianna added eagerly, She's already spoken with potential investors who could take Langston Rehabilitation to the next level, multiple locations, expanded services. It could become a regional brand. I built that clinic from nothing, I said quietly. When you were children, I slept on treatment tables because I couldn't afford both rent for a proper apartment and the equipment needed for effective therapy. I missed school plays and soccer games because one more appointment meant keeping the electricity on. I turned down dates and vacations and any semblance of a personal life because every moment not working meant risking everything I'd built. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mother stared at her plate. And now, I continued, you want to hand it over to someone who's never treated a patient, never filed an insurance claim, never had to choose between paying her own medical bills and funding the business, someone whose primary qualification is being married to a successful orthodontist. Richard winced. Marjorie's face hardened. That's not fair, Mum, Matthew said sharply. This isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about growing what you've built into something bigger. Something you can all profit from, you mean, I replied. You're being selfish, Brianna said, her voice rising. This benefits everyone, especially you. You could finally relax, travel, do whatever retired people do. I don't recall mentioning retirement, I said, my tone still even. Matthew pushed the folder closer to me. Just look at the numbers. The profit-sharing arrangement is more than fair. And with the expansion plans, no, I said simply. The table fell silent. My mother's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down. What do you mean, no? Marjorie asked, her practiced charm slipping to reveal annoyance beneath. This was the moment. I reached for my leather case, which I'd placed beside my chair, and withdrew the original agreement, the one they thought I had forgotten or never created. The sound of the zipper seemed unnaturally loud in the silent room. I mean that according to Clause 4.3 of the clinic's governance document, no family member may assume management without unanimous board approval. I placed the document on the table, and since I hold majority stake and am chairperson of that board, your proposal is not viable. Matthew froze mid-sentence, his fork suspended in the air. The confidence drained from his face. Brianna's smirk vanished. My sister's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. What governance document? She asked, her voice higher than usual. The clinic is a sole proprietorship. It was, I corrected. 3 years ago, on the advice of my attorney, I restructured it as an LLC with a formal board. Karen Fields is Vice President of Operations. Dr. James Chen, who has referred patients to us for 15 years, serves as an external board member, and I am the majority owner and chairperson. I withdrew another document from my case. I also have here an itemized list of services provided to family members free of charge over the years. Marjorie's wellness, therapies, Dad's shoulder rehabilitation, Brianna's specialized treatments for her dance injuries, Matthew's sports massage sessions throughout college. I placed this paper beside the first. The total value of these services exceeds $147,000. I never sent invoices because I considered it a gift, family helping family. My mother gasped softly. Should I have treated you all like customers rather than family? I asked. Should I have demanded payment from my own parents, my own children? That was never who I wanted to be, but it seems I've created a situation where my generosity has been mistaken for weakness, and my business acumen has been underestimated. For the first time, I allowed a hint of emotion to enter my voice. Did any of you ever stop to consider that I might have plans for my own clinic? Goals I'm still working toward? Dreams beyond being pushed aside so others can profit from my decades of sacrifice? No one answered. No one could meet my eyes. I stood up, gathering my documents back into the leather case. I think I've lost my appetite. Thank you for dinner, Mom. Dad. As I turned to leave, Matthew found his voice. Mom, wait. We were just trying to help, to give you a break. I paused at the doorway and looked back at him, at all of them. If you want to help, start by respecting what I've built. Start by asking what I want instead of deciding for me. Start by recognizing that while you were planning how to take over my legacy, I was planning how to protect it. I walked out lighter than I had felt in decades. No guilt weighed me down, no obligation chained me to that table or to their expectations. For the first time in years, I held the silence, not them, and as I drove home through the quiet Raleigh streets, I realized that the most important boundary I'd established wasn't in any legal document. It was in finally standing up for myself. The morning after the dinner, I arrived at the clinic early, as was my habit. The waiting room was still, dark, chairs neatly arranged, magazines precisely fanned across the side tables. This space had been my sanctuary for decades, the place where I felt most competent, most myself. Karen arrived minutes after me, 2 coffee cups in hand. She didn't ask how the dinner had gone. She didn't need to. The slight lift in my posture, the determined set of my jaw, told her everything. "Black, 2 sugars," she said, handing me one of the cups. "So, it's done?" I nodded, taking a grateful sip. "It's done." She settled into her chair at the reception desk, her movements efficient as she booted up the computer system. "Any casualties I should know about?" "Several bruised egos, 1 family dinner abandoned before dessert. My mother's pot roast tragically uneaten." Karen snorted. "I'm sure they'll recover. The question is, will they regroup?" It was a fair question. My family had been outmaneuvered, not defeated. People driven by entitlement rarely surrender after a single setback. "Probably," I admitted, "but they'll need a new strategy, and I'll be ready." The first patient arrived at 7:45 a.m., Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly woman recovering from a hip replacement. As I guided her through gentle stretches, monitoring her progress with practiced eyes, I felt the familiar satisfaction that came from doing meaningful work. This was what my children and sister couldn't understand. The clinic wasn't just a business to be optimized or an asset to be leveraged. It was a calling. By lunchtime, I had treated 6 patients and reviewed treatment plans for a dozen more. I was washing my hands between appointments when my phone buzzed with a text from Brianna. "We need to talk." "Dinner tonight?" I stared at the message, considering my response carefully. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the boundary I'd established so firmly the night before. But another part, the mother who had never stopped hoping her children would see her clearly, wanted to give her a chance. "I can meet for coffee at 5:30. The shop near the clinic, a public place, a limited time commitment, clear boundaries." Her response came quickly. "Fine. See you then." When I arrived at the coffee shop that evening, Brianna was already there, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, designer sunglasses perched on top of her head. She'd ordered for both of us, a small gesture that might have seemed thoughtful if she hadn't selected exactly what she preferred, an overly sweet latte, rather than what she knew I drank, black coffee, 2 sugars. "Mom," she began as I sat down, "last night got out of hand." I waited, giving her space to continue. "We were trying to help," she insisted, leaning forward. "You've done so much for everyone else. We thought it was time someone looked out for you. By taking away my business," I stated flatly. She flinched. "That's not how we saw it. We saw it as freeing you from the burden." "Did any of you ever ask if I felt burdened?" Brianna stirred her latte, avoiding my eyes. "You'd never admit it if you were. You've always been like that, putting everyone else first, acting like you're invincible." I considered her words, recognizing the grain of truth in them. I had cultivated an image of strength and self-sufficiency, partly out of necessity and partly out of pride. Perhaps in doing so, I'd made it difficult for others to offer genuine help. "You're right that I've worked hard to be self-reliant," I acknowledged, "but there's a difference between offering support and staging a takeover. What happened last night wasn't about helping me. It wasn't entirely selfless," she admitted reluctantly. "But it wasn't as calculated as you think. Aunt Marjorie really does have connections that could grow the business." "The business is growing just fine under my management," I said firmly. "Our new pediatric wing has brought in 27 new clients in the last quarter alone." Brianna looked surprised. "I didn't know about that." "Because you never asked," I pointed out gently. "None of you asked what plans I had, what successes I was achieving, what dreams I'm still working toward. You looked at what I built and saw only something to be claimed, not something to be respected." She was quiet for a long moment, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I don't think I ever really understood what the clinic meant to you," she finally said. "To me, it was just in where you worked, where you spent all your time. Sometimes I resented it." "I know," I said softly. "When Matthew started talking about modernizing it, about bringing in Aunt Marjorie, it seemed like a way to finally be part of something that had always separated us from you. For the first time, I saw the situation from her perspective, a child watching her mother pour endless energy into a business rather than into family time. a young woman who had interpreted my absence at school events not as painful necessity, but as preferential choice. The clinic kept a roof over our heads, I reminded her. It paid for your dance lessons, your college tuition, your dental surgery when the insurance wouldn't cover it. I know that now, she said, but as a kid, all I knew was that you weren't there for my recitals because you were working, that we couldn't go on vacations like my friends' families because the clinic needed new equipment. I felt a pang of old guilt, quickly followed by resolve. I made the best choices I could as a single mother building a business. I won't apologize for that. I'm not asking you to, Brianna said, surprising me. I'm just trying to explain why this seemed reasonable to us, why we didn't see it as taking something from you. We sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon crowd of the coffee shop moving around us, oblivious to our private reckoning. Where do we go from here? She finally asked. It was a fair question. The damage had been done, trust had been broken, but she was still my daughter. I was still her mother. We start. Over, I said simply, with clearer boundaries. I won't let anyone, not you, not Matthew, not Marjorie, take control of what I've built. But I'm willing to listen if you have ideas to contribute. Real ideas, not power grabs. And Matthew? Aunt Marjorie? That's up to them, I said. I've drawn my line in the sand. They can respect it or not. Brianna nodded slowly, seeming to truly hear me for the first time in years. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for last night, but for not seeing you, the real you. The apology wasn't complete. It didn't acknowledge the full scope of what they'd tried to do, but it was a start. A small crack in the wall of entitlement that had grown between us. As we left the coffee shop, Brianna awkwardly offered a hug. The first genuine one we'd shared in longer than I cared to remember. It was brief and slightly stiff, but it held the possibility of something healing. Matthew was less receptive when I called him the next day. His voice on the phone was cool, professional, the same tone he likely used with difficult clients. I understand you had coffee with Brianna, he said instead of a greeting. She seems to think we all overreacted. And you? Don't agree, I asked, keeping my own voice steady. I think you've been working too hard for too long and it's affected your judgment, he replied. The proposal we presented was sound from a business perspective. Your emotional attachment to the clinic is clouding your ability to see that. The condescension in his tone stung, but I refused to be baited. My emotional attachment built that business, Matthew, and my judgment, clouded or not, has kept it successful for 25 years. Mom, no, I interrupted firmly. I've made my position clear. The clinic is not available for takeover by family or anyone else. When you're ready to have a conversation that respects that reality, I'm here. Until then, I think we need some space. The silence on the other end of the line stretched, until I wondered if he'd hung up. Fine, he finally said, his voice tight. Space it is. As I ended the call, I felt the weight of maternal guilt pressing on my chest. Had I been too harsh? Too uncompromising? But then I remembered the manila folder, the carefully orchestrated dinner, the assumption that I would simply hand over my life's work because they had decided it was time. No, I hadn't been too harsh. I had finally been clear. 3 months passed. The Carolina summer arrived with its oppressive heat and afternoon thunderstorms. The clinic continued to thrive despite, or perhaps because of, the absence of family interference. My relationship with Brianna had entered a tentative healing phase, characterized by occasional text messages and brief coffee meetings where we carefully avoided mention of the clinic or that infamous dinner. Matthew remained distant, channeling his frustration into his consulting work in Charlotte. My mother called weekly, her conversations studiously neutral, while my father occasionally stopped by the clinic for legitimate treatment of his arthritic shoulder, always insisting on paying the full rate now, a small gesture of respect that meant more than he knew. Marjorie had retreated entirely, licking her wounds and redirecting her ambitions elsewhere. Through the family grapevine, I heard she'd begun consulting for a dermatology practice across town, a consolation prize that apparently offered enough prestige to soothe her bruised ego. On a particularly humid Tuesday morning, Karen knocked on my office door, her expression unreadable. You have a visitor, she said. I don't have any appointments until 11, I replied, glancing at my calendar. It's not a patient. Karen hesitated. It's Dr. Eliza Washington from Carolina Medical Center. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Dr. Washington was the Director of Rehabilitation Services at the largest hospital network in the region, a position I'd once aspired to before choosing the independence of private practice. "Send her in," I said, quickly straightening the papers on my desk. Dr. Washington entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to running large departments. In her early 60s, with close-cropped silver hair and impeccable posture, she exuded the kind of authority that came from decades of excellence in a challenging field. "Dr. Langston," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "It's a pleasure," I replied, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. "What brings you to our humble clinic?" She smiled slightly at the understatement. Langston Rehabilitation and Wellness was now anything but humble, having expanded to occupy the entire building I'd purchased years ago, with a staff of 8 therapists and a reputation for exceptional outcomes. "I'll be direct," she said. "I'm retiring next year." I nodded, unsure where this was heading. "The hospital board is already discussing succession planning," she continued. "They're considering various candidates to take over as Director of Rehabilitation Services. Your name has come up repeatedly." I blinked, momentarily speechless. "I'm flattered, but I own this clinic. I've built it from nothing. I couldn't possibly—" "I'm not here to recruit you away from your practice," Dr. Washington interrupted with a knowing smile. "I understand the value of what you've created here. I'm proposing something different, a partnership." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a slim folder. "Carolina Medical Center is looking to expand its outpatient rehabilitation services beyond the main campus. Rather than building new facilities from scratch, they're considering strategic partnerships with established private practices." I leaned forward. My interest piqued, despite my wariness of partnerships after my family's attempted coup. "The arrangement would allow practices like yours to maintain their independence and management structure, while gaining the resources, referral network, and insurance leverage of the larger hospital system," Dr. Washington explained. "You would remain owner and director of Langston Rehabilitation and Wellness, but we would bring additional resources to help you expand even further." "What's in it for the hospital?" I asked, my business instincts kicking in. Dr. Washington smiled approvingly at the question. "Extended geographic reach without the capital expenditure of building new facilities. Access to your specialized expertise in pediatric rehabilitation, which our system currently lacks. And association with a practice that has an exceptional reputation for patient outcomes." She slid the folder across my desk. "The details are all here. Take your time reviewing them. This isn't a decision to be made lightly." After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, the folder unopened before me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was the legitimate business opportunity my family had claimed to offer, presented with respect for what I'd built, rather than a presumption of entitlement to it. When Karen poked her head in an hour later, I was still staring at the folder. "Well," she prompted, "are you going to open it, or are you developing X-ray vision?" I laughed, breaking the tension. "I'm a little afraid to, honestly." Karen came fully into the office and sat down. "Because of what happened with your family?" "Partly," I admitted, "but also because, what if it's actually a good opportunity? What if this is the next step I've been working toward without even realizing it?" "Then you take it," Karen said simply. "Rebecca, you've spent 25 years building something remarkable. You've defended it against people who tried to take it from you. Now maybe it's time to grow it even bigger, on your terms." That evening, I took the folder home and spread its contents across my dining table. The same table where I'd once budgeted by candlelight during a power outage in the clinic's early days, deciding whether to pay for medical supplies or my own health insurance that month. The proposal was detailed, thoughtful, and surprisingly generous. The hospital would provide capital for expansion, access to their sophisticated billing systems, inclusion in their insurance networks, and a steady stream of referrals. In exchange, Langston Rehabilitation would maintain its name and identity while becoming an official affiliate of the Carolina Medical Center network. Most importantly, I would retain full control of operations, staffing, and treatment protocols. It was a partnership of equals, not an absorption or takeover. I slept on the decision for 3 nights, discussing the details with Karen, consulting my attorney, and weighing every angle. On the 4th day, I called Dr. Washington and agreed to move forward. The negotiations took 2 months, By late August, the papers were signed, and Langston Rehabilitation and Wellness became the first private practice to join the Carolina Medical Center's new affiliate network. The announcement made the local business section of the Raleigh News and Observer, complete with a photo of me shaking hands with Dr. Washington and the hospital's CEO. I didn't expect my family to notice or care. I was wrong. The text from Matthew arrived the morning after the newspaper feature. Just saw the news. Congratulations. Can we talk? I stared at my phone for a long moment, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to maintain the protective distance I'd established, but another part recognized the olive branch for what it was. Thank you. Coffee at Main Street Cafe tomorrow, 5:30. His response was immediate. I'll be there. The cafe was bustling with the after-work crowd when Matthew arrived, precisely on time as always. He'd lost weight since I'd last seen him, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of stress or insufficient sleep. "Mom," he said, awkwardly leaning in for a hug that I returned with. Equal uncertainty. We ordered black coffee for me and Americano for him, and found a small table in the corner. "You look well," he offered. "So do you," I lied politely. "How's Charlotte?" He shrugged. "Busy. The firm just landed a major client, so I've been putting in 80-hour weeks. That sounds exhausting." "It is." He stirred his coffee unnecessarily. "But that's not what I wanted to talk about." I waited, giving him space to find his words. "I saw the article about your partnership with Carolina Medical," he finally said. "It's impressive. A major accomplishment." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciating the acknowledgement. "It made me realize something," he continued, his voice dropping slightly. "What I tried to do at that dinner was wrong and stupid." I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was stunned by the admission. "We thought we knew better than you," he went on. "We thought we were bringing something you needed, but we didn't understand what you'd already built, how sophisticated your business already was. The fact that Carolina Medical Center wants to partner with you, that says everything about the quality of what you've created." It was the closest thing to an apology I could have expected from my proud, ambitious son. "The clinic has always been more than just a business to me," I said carefully. "It's been my purpose, my contribution. When you all tried to take control of it, we violated something sacred," he finished for me, surprising me with his insight. "I get that now. I didn't then." We sat in silence. For a moment, the chatter of the cafe flowing around us. "So what happens now?" I finally asked. Matthew straightened his shoulders slightly. "I was hoping we could start over. Not with the clinic. I understand that's your domain, completely. But with our relationship. I'd like that," I said softly. "And I was wondering—" He hesitated. "The article mentioned expansion plans. If you need any help with the business side, projections, logistics, anything, I'd be happy to offer advice, just advice," he added quickly. "No strings attached." I considered his offer carefully. It would be easy to reject it outright, to maintain the absolute boundary I'd established. But perhaps there was a middle path, one that respected my authority while allowing him to contribute in a meaningful way. "Actually," I said slowly, "I could use some help analyzing the potential locations for our satellite clinic. The hospital has data on patient demographics across the region, but I need someone with a fresh eye to identify the most promising areas." Matthew's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I'd be happy to look at the data. I've been working with a similar expansion project for a retail client, and some of the analytics might be applicable." For the first time in months, we fell into a conversation that felt natural, unforced. He asked intelligent questions about the partnership structure, offered thoughtful observations about healthcare market trends, and actually listened to my answers. As we were leaving, he paused at the door. "Mom, I really am sorry. Not just about the clinic, but for not seeing you, really seeing you, all these years." The words echoed Brianna's earlier apology, but coming from Matthew, they carried even more weight. My son, who had always been quicker to judge than to understand, was finally looking at me with clear eyes. "We all have our blind spots," I said gently. "The important thing is recognizing them before it's too late." As I drove home, that evening I felt a lightness that had been absent for too long. The partnership with Carolina Medical represented a new chapter for the clinic, but perhaps it also marked a new beginning for my family. One built on respect rather than entitlement, on appreciation rather than assumption. The following week I invited both Matthew and Brianna to the clinic for a tour of the newly renovated Pediatric wing. They came together, tentative but willing, and I watched with quiet satisfaction as they truly saw, perhaps for the first time, the magnitude of what I had built. The partnership with Carolina Medical Center brought immediate benefits. Referrals increased by 30% in the first quarter. The sophisticated billing system reduced our administrative costs significantly. Plans for a satellite location were moving forward, with Matthew's analysis helping us identify an underserved area in the growing northern suburbs. By late November, as Thanksgiving approached, I felt a cautious optimism about both the business and my healing relationships with my children. Marjorie remained distant, but I'd come to accept that some bridges couldn't or shouldn't be rebuilt. Then came the letter that threatened everything. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier rather than regular mail, an ominous distinction that immediately put me on alert. The envelope bore the letterhead of Whitman & Associates, one of Raleigh's most prestigious law firms. Karen brought it to my office, her expression concerned. "This just arrived. Seems important." I opened it with steady hands, though my heart rate had accelerated. As I read the contents, a cold weight settled in my stomach. "What is it?" Karen asked, noting my expression. "A cease and desist letter," I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the turmoil inside. "Marjorie is claiming I misrepresented my credentials and treatment protocols to Carolina Medical Center, rendering our partnership agreement invalid. She's threatening to sue both me and the hospital unless I agree to a corrective management structure, with her as the proposed qualified supervisor." Karen sank into the chair opposite my desk. "That's absurd. Your credentials are impeccable. And what does she even mean by treatment protocols?" I scanned the letter again. It's deliberately vague, but there's a reference to unconventional methodologies in the pediatric program. "Your pediatric program is the most rigorously documented and outcome-focused in the state." Karen's voice rose with indignation. "Every treatment is evidence-based and approved by the leading professional organizations." "I know that," I said quietly. "And so does Marjorie. That's not the point." "What is the point, then?" I set the letter down carefully. "The point is disruption. Even a baseless lawsuit creates uncertainty, negative publicity, potential delays in our expansion. Carolina Medical might decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth." "So this is her new strategy," Karen said, understanding dawning. "Since she couldn't take over directly, she's trying to damage your relationship with your new partners." "Exactly." I stared at the letter, anger and disappointment battling within me. "She's not trying to win a legal battle. She's trying to create enough chaos that I'll be forced to accept her help to make it go away." I called my attorney immediately. Howard Fisher had been my legal counsel since the early days of the clinic, guiding me through everything from lease negotiations to insurance disputes. He agreed to come to the clinic that afternoon. Howard arrived at 3, his weathered briefcase and rumpled suit a deceptive disguise for one of the sharpest legal minds in the area. After reading the letter, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "It's garbage," he said bluntly. "Pure intimidation with no legal substance. Your credentials are a matter of public record. Your treatment protocols are documented, peer-reviewed, and fully compliant with all regulatory standards." "But will Carolina Medical see it that way?" I asked. "They've only been partners with us for a few months. They might decide this potential controversy isn't worth the headache." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "That's the real threat here, not the legal action itself, but the uncertainty and disruption it creates." He tapped the letter. "But notice they've given you an option to avoid the lawsuit altogether. Accept Marjorie's supervision, which is never going to happen," I said firmly. "Of course not," he agreed. "But it reveals their true objective. This isn't about your credentials or protocols. It's about leveraging legal threats to achieve what they couldn't through family manipulation." "So what do we do?" Karen asked. Howard thought for a moment. "Two-pronged approach. First, we draft a comprehensive response, dismantling each allegation with documented evidence of Rebecca's qualifications and the clinic's adherence to best practices. Second, we immediately inform Carolina Medical Center about this threat and our response, demonstrating transparency and confidence." "Won't that worry them?" I asked. "Less than if they hear about it from someone else," Howard pointed out. "Partners value transparency, especially in potential crises. By bringing this to them proactively, you demonstrate both integrity and confidence in your position." I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his strategy. "I'll call Dr. Washington today." After Howard left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the letter. The audacity of the attack was breathtaking, even for Marjorie. She was willing to risk my professional reputation, built over decades of ethical practice and dedication to patient care, for her own ambition. Before I could call Dr. Washington, my phone rang. It was Matthew. "Mum," he said without preamble, "did you receive a legal letter today?" I froze. "How do you know about that?" There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "Because Aunt Marjorie called me this morning asking for my support. She said she's taking legal action to protect the family business from being given away to corporate interests." My heart sank. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her she was making a terrible mistake," he replied, his voice firm, "that her actions were not only legally baseless, but morally reprehensible." Relief washed through me. "You did?" "Of course I did," Matthew said, sounding slightly offended. "Mom, I know I was wrong before. I've admitted that. But I would never support something like this, an attack on your professional integrity, your life's work." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with unexpected emotion. "Don't thank me for basic decency," he replied. "Listen, I think you should—" First, Marjorie didn't come up with this on her own. She's been meeting with Richard's cousin, who's a partner at Whitman and Associates. They've been planning this for weeks. "How do you know that?" "Because she tried to recruit Brianna first, about a month ago. Brianna called me, upset about it. We agreed to stay out of it, hoping Marjorie would come to her senses. Obviously, she didn't. I absorbed this information slowly, processing the implications. So both of you knew this might be coming, and neither of you warned me." Matthew was quiet for a moment. "We hoped, it was just talk, that she wouldn't actually go through with it. I'm sorry we didn't tell you sooner. I wanted to be angry at their silence, but I couldn't find the energy for it. The fact that both my children had refused to participate in Marjorie's scheme was enough for now." "What can I do to help?" Matthew asked. I considered his offer. "Actually, there is something. Carolina Medical needs to know about this threat immediately, and it would be better coming from multiple sources. If you'd be willing to call Dr. Washington and corroborate that this lawsuit is baseless family manipulation rather than a legitimate concern—" "I'll do it," he said immediately. "I'll call right now. And Mom?" "Yes? We're with you this time, all the way." After ending the call, I sat in silence for a moment, processing the shift in alliances. My children, who had once allied with Marjorie against me, were now standing firmly on my side. The betrayal still stung. Their earlier silence about Marjorie's plans proved they weren't fully trustworthy yet, but their current support mattered. I called Dr. Washington and explained the situation with complete transparency. To my relief, she responded not with alarm, but with calm resolve. "Rebecca," she said when I finished, "the hospital vetted you and your practice thoroughly before proposing this partnership. We're well aware of your impeccable credentials and evidence-based protocols. This legal threat is clearly without merit, but the potential disruption is precisely what they're counting on," she finished for me. "We won't give them the satisfaction. Our legal team will respond alongside yours, presenting a united front. This partnership is valuable to Carolina Medical Center, and we stand behind it completely." By the end of the day, a joint strategy was in place. Howard would coordinate with the hospital's legal department on a comprehensive response to Whitman and Associates, while Dr. Washington arranged a meeting with the hospital board to reaffirm their confidence in our partnership. As I drove home that evening, I felt exhausted but resolute. Marjorie's attack was more vicious than I had anticipated, targeting not just my business, but my professional reputation, the foundation of everything I'd built. Yet her desperation revealed something important. She knew she couldn't win fairly, couldn't compete with what I'd created through decades of legitimate expertise and dedication. That night, I received an unexpected text from my father. "I heard what's happening. This isn't right. Your mother and I are behind you, Rebecca. Always." It was a small message, but it meant everything. My parents, who had sat silently at that fateful dinner, were finally finding their voices. The battle had just begun, but for the first time I wasn't fighting alone. 3 weeks after the cease and desist letter arrived, Howard called with news. "Whitman and Associates has withdrawn the threat," he announced, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Our joint response with Carolina Medical's legal team was persuasive." "Persuasive how?" I asked, leaning back in my office chair. We didn't just defend your credentials and protocols, which are, of course, impeccable. We counter-threatened with a defamation suit backed by Carolina Medical Center. When faced with the prospect of battling one of the largest hospital networks in the state, they folded rather quickly. Relief washed through me. So it's over? Howard hesitated. The legal threat is over, but I doubt Marjorie will stop here. He was right. 2 days later, my mother called, her voice strained. Rebecca, I think you should come to dinner tonight. Marjorie is insisting on a family meeting. She says it's time to resolve this situation once and for all. By situation, I assume she means my continued refusal to hand over my business, I said dryly. My mother sighed. Please come. Your father and we need to set things right. We should have spoken up at that first dinner. I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. What new approach had Marjorie devised? And what did my mother mean about setting things right? I'll be there at 7. I agreed. This time I came prepared. In my leather case I carried not just the clinic's legal documents, but copies of the withdrawn cease and desist letter, Carolina Medical's vote of confidence in our partnership, and testimonials from patients whose lives had been transformed by our work. The house looked exactly as it had that fateful night months ago. Same seasonal flowers, same soft lighting, same scent of my mother's cooking, but something felt different. There was a tension in the air, an electricity that hadn't been present before. When I entered the dining room, I immediately noticed the changed seating arrangement. My father sat at the head of the table, his rightful place reclaimed. My mother stood beside him, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Matthew and Brianna sat on one side of the table, while Marjorie and Richard occupied the other. My place was set beside my children, a symbolic alignment that wasn't lost on me. Rebecca, my father said, standing to greet me. His voice was stronger than I'd heard it in years. Thank you for coming. Marjorie didn't rise, her face a mask of forced pleasantness. Richard looked distinctly uncomfortable, tugging at his collar as though it had suddenly tightened. Before we eat, my father continued once I was seated, there are some things that need to be said. Things that should have been said months ago. Marjorie shifted in her seat. Dad, perhaps we should eat first and discuss business after. No, he interrupted firmly. We've allowed misunderstandings and poor communication to damage this family for too long. My mother nodded in agreement. Your father and I have been talking. About the clinic, about your sister's actions, about our own silence when we should have spoken up. I glanced at Matthew and Brianna, who wore identical expressions of surprised interest. This wasn't what any of us had expected. My father cleared his throat. Rebecca built her clinic from nothing. We watched her work. Impossible hours. Sacrifice everything, even sleep on treatment tables to make it successful. We benefited from her generosity. My shoulder therapy, your mother's treatments after her surgery, all free of charge. He looked directly at Marjorie. You benefited too, Marjorie. All those wellness therapies for your migraines that Rebecca never billed you for, yet somehow you and the children came. To see her business as a family asset rather than her personal achievement. Marjorie's cheeks flushed. That's not fair. I was trying to help expand the business, bring in new opportunities. Without being asked, my mother interjected gently. Without respecting that, it was Rebecca's decision to make. And when that didn't work, my father continued, his voice hardening, you resorted to legal threats designed to damage her professional reputation. That crossed a line, Marjorie, one that your mother and I cannot ignore or excuse. The room fell silent. Marjorie stared at our parents in disbelief. This clearly wasn't the family meeting she had envisioned. I don't understand, she finally said. I thought we were here to find a compromise, a way forward that benefits everyone. That's the problem, I spoke up quietly. You still see this as a negotiation where you're entitled to some share of what I've built, but my clinic isn't a family inheritance to be divided. It's my life's work, my creation. We've all made mistakes here, Matthew said unexpectedly. Brianna and I were wrong to assume Mum needed us to rescue her from her own business. We didn't want to. See how capable she really is. Brianna nodded in agreement. But Aunt Marjorie, what you did with that legal threat, that went beyond a mistake. That was deliberately trying to hurt Mom's reputation and business. Marjorie's face hardened. I did what I thought was necessary to protect our family interests. Rebecca was giving away our potential to corporate outsiders. Our potential, I echoed. There is no hour when it comes to the clinic. That's what you've never understood. My father reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Marjorie, your mother and I have come to a decision. If you continue these attempts to undermine Rebecca or damage her business, you will be removed from our will. A shocked gasp escaped Marjorie's lips. Richard's eyes widened. Dad, Marjorie protested, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious, he replied firmly. Your behavior has shown a disregard for basic family values, respect, honesty, recognition of others' hard work and achievements. Your mother and I won't reward that, not with the modest inheritance we have to leave. Tears sprang to Marjorie's eyes, whether from genuine emotion or calculated effect, I couldn't tell. This isn't fair. You're taking her side without even hearing me out. We've heard you, my mother said gently. For months, we've heard you talking about helping Rebecca, about how the clinic would be better under different management. We listened when we should have spoken up. That was our failing. Marjorie turned to me, desperation creeping into her voice. Rebecca, surely we can work something out. A role for me in the business, a consulting position. No, I said simply. The clinic doesn't need your help. It never did. What it needs, what I need, is for you to respect boundaries. This conversation is over, my father declared, his tone brooking no argument. Rebecca has built something remarkable on her own. She's partnered with Carolina Medical Center on her own terms, and she's defended herself against your attacks with dignity and professionalism. It's time for you to accept that and move on. Marjorie stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Richard, we're leaving, she announced, grabbing her purse. I won't sit here and be attacked by my own family. Richard hesitated, looking uncomfortable. Marjorie, perhaps we should? Now, she insisted. As they left, the front door slamming behind them, a strange silence settled over the dining room. None of us had touched the food my mother had prepared. Well, my father finally said with a small smile, I suppose we should eat before it gets cold. The tension broken, we all laughed, a genuine, relieved sound that seemed to lighten the very air around us. As my mother served her famous pot roast, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Matthew's new project in Charlotte, Brianna's recent job interview, my father's woodworking hobby. Later, as we finished dessert, my mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry we didn't stand up for you sooner, Rebecca. We were trying to stay neutral to keep the peace. We should have recognized that sometimes peace comes at too high a price. It's never too late to do the right thing, I said, returning her squeeze. As I drove home that night, I felt a profound sense of closure. The family dynamics that had twisted and strained for so long had finally broken into the open, been examined in the light and begun to heal. Marjorie might never accept the truth about her entitlement, but it no longer mattered. The rest of my family had finally seen clearly, not just my achievement, but the principle behind it. Some things aren't communal property, no matter how close the family ties. Some achievements belong solely to their creator. The next morning at the clinic, Karen noticed my lighter mood immediately. Good news? She asked as she handed me my usual coffee. The best kind, I replied. Family news. Ah, she nodded knowingly. The kind that doesn't show up on balance sheets but changes everything anyway. Exactly. We fell into our usual morning routine, reviewing appointments and treatment plans. Around 10, my phone buzzed with a text from Matthew. Mum, can we meet this weekend? I have some ideas for the satellite clinic launch I'd like to run by you. Just ideas. No takeover attempts, I promise. I smiled at the self-deprecating humor, a good sign of his growth, and replied, Saturday morning coffee. I'll bring the projections. My phone buzzed again almost immediately, but this time it was Brianna. Hey, Mom. I just landed an interview for marketing director at that healthcare startup I told you about. Could use some advice on how to speak their language. Dinner this week? My children were finding their own paths, their own successes. They were coming to me now not as dependents, but as adults seeking guidance from someone whose expertise they finally recognized. That evening, as I locked up my office, I paused to look around the clinic. The waiting room with its comfortable chairs and calming colors, the treatment rooms equipped with the best technology I could provide, the pediatric wing where children learn to move, to trust their bodies again, to play without pain. All of it built through my vision, my perseverance, my refusal to surrender to easier paths. And now, with the Carolina Medical Partnership, it would grow even further, not as someone else's achievement, but as the natural evolution of what I had created. I ran my hand along the wall as I walked toward the exit, a gesture of connection to the physical space that represented so much more than brick and mortar. This building housed not just a business, but a legacy of healing, of service, of quiet determination. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. True peace. Not the provisional calm between family storms, but the settled certainty of having fought the right battle, having held firm when it mattered most. My children had learned that respect can't be demanded, only earned. My parents had found their voices again, and I had reaffirmed the most important lesson of all, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's the only way to ensure that what you've built with love and sacrifice endures, as you intended it to. 1 year later, the satellite location of Langston Rehabilitation and Wellness opened its doors in the northern suburbs of Raleigh. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a small crowd, local officials, representatives from Carolina Medical Center, current patients eager to see the expansion of a practice that had changed their lives. Standing before them with oversized scissors in hand, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for this new milestone, but for the journey that had brought me here, from a single rented room with water stains on the ceiling to a thriving practice with multiple locations and a prestigious hospital partnership. Before we cut this ribbon, I said to the gathered crowd, I'd like to thank a few people who made this possible. I acknowledged Karen first, my right hand for over 20 years, whose loyalty and insight had helped me navigate countless challenges. I thanked Dr. Washington and the Carolina medical team for recognizing the value of what we'd built and helping us expand it further. Then I turned to where my family stood together near the front. I'd like to thank my children, Matthew and Brianna, for their contributions to this expansion. Matthew's analysis helped us identify this perfect location, and Brianna's marketing expertise has been instrumental in our community outreach. They both smiled, genuine pride in their eyes, not for what they'd claimed, but for what they'd actually contributed. And my parents, I continued, whose unwavering support has meant more than they know. My father stood, a little straighter. My mother wiped a tear from her eye. Their silent presence at that pivotal dinner had once felt like abandonment. Their vocal support now felt like vindication. Marjorie was not in attendance. After the confrontation at my parents' house, she had retreated from family gatherings, nursing her wounded pride and thwarted ambitions. Richard occasionally reached out, offering tentative olive branches on her behalf, but she herself maintained a stubborn distance, unable or unwilling to acknowledge the fundamental unfairness of her actions. It was a loss, certainly, but I had come to understand that some relationships can't be preserved without sacrificing essential boundaries. Sometimes the price of peace is too high. As I cut the ribbon, officially opening the new clinic, applause erupted from the crowd. Flashbulbs popped as the local newspaper captured the moment for posterity. I smiled, not just for the cameras, but from genuine joy. This was what success looked like, not just the expanded business or the professional recognition, but the integrity with which it had been achieved. Later that afternoon, as the event wound down and staff began preparing the new facility for its first patients the following day, Karen approached me with a small wrapped package. "A little something to commemorate the occasion," she said, handing it to me. I unwrapped it carefully to find a framed document, Clause 4.3 of the original agreement, the protection I'd put in place years earlier that had ultimately safeguarded everything. "To hang in your new office," Karen explained. "A reminder of how important it is to protect what you've built." I hugged her tightly, words temporarily beyond me. She understood, as few others did, what this journey had really cost and what it had been worth. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my home for my parents and children. It wasn't an elaborate affair, just a simple meal shared around my dining table, the same table where I'd once budgeted by candlelight during the clinic's early days. "I've been thinking," Matthew said as we finished our meal, "about what happened last year. The dinner, the attempted takeover, all of it." Brianna grimaced slightly. "Not exactly our finest moment." "No," he agreed, "but it taught me something important, about respect, about recognizing the difference between what you're given And what you earn. It taught me about boundaries, Brianna added. That loving someone doesn't mean you own them or what they've created. My mother nodded. It taught your father and me about speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable. About not letting false peace mask real injustice. And what did it teach you, Rebecca? My father asked gently. I considered the question, thinking back over. The tumultuous year, the ambush dinner, the legal threat, the family confrontation, the partnership and expansion. It taught me that I'm stronger than I knew, I replied. That standing up for myself isn't selfish. It's necessary. That my work has value, not just for my patients or the community, but for me. And that I don't have to choose between being a good mother and being a successful businesswoman. I can be both on my own terms. My father raised his glass. To Rebecca, who built something extraordinary and had the courage to protect it. To Mom, Matthew and Brianna echoed, raising their glasses in turn. As we clinked glasses, I felt the completion of a circle. The clinic that had once seemed to separate me from my family had ultimately brought us closer, not through surrender or compromise, but through genuine understanding and respect. 3 days later, the new satellite clinic welcomed its first patients. A mother brought her son for pediatric rehabilitation following a sports injury. An elderly gentleman came for treatment of chronic arthritis pain. A young woman arrived for therapy after a car accident had left her with limited mobility. Each of them was greeted by name, treated with dignity and expertise, guided through their healing journey with compassion and professionalism. This was the true legacy of Langston Rehabilitation and Wellness. Not a business empire or a family asset, but a place where lives were changed through dedicated service. In my new office, I hung Karen's gift, the framed clause 4.3, beside my degrees and certifications. It represented something just as important as my professional qualifications, the wisdom to protect what matters, the courage to stand firm when necessary. As I prepared for my first patient of the day, I glanced at a photo on my desk, a new one, taken at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. My parents flanking me, my children standing proudly beside me. A family united not by entitlement, but by respect, not by obligation, but by choice. The journey had been difficult, painful at times. There were still wounds healing, trust being rebuilt, relationships being redefined. Marjorie's absence from our lives remained a quiet sorrow, though I hadn't given up hope that someday, somehow, she might come to understand. But through it all, I had remained true to myself and to the principles that had guided my career from the beginning. That healing happens through both expertise and empathy, that success means nothing if achieved through compromise of core values, that the most important boundaries are the ones we set for ourselves. As I welcomed my first patient at the new clinic, I felt the rightness of where I stood, in the space I had created, doing the work I loved, surrounded by people who finally saw me clearly. Family may share your blood, but that doesn't mean they own your sweat. The moment you learn to set boundaries is the moment you reclaim your freedom. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning a battle, but in standing firmly in your truth and letting that truth speak for itself. After decades of building something from nothing, of defending it against those who would claim it without earning it, of expanding it through legitimate partnership rather than forced takeover, I had finally secured my legacy. Not just the physical clinics or the professional reputation, but the deeper legacy of integrity, perseverance, and dignity. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the buildings or the partnership or even the patients served, but the example set that a woman could build something extraordinary through her own vision and effort, could defend it when threatened, could expand it on her own terms, and could ultimately define success for herself. That was a legacy worth protecting. A legacy that would endure long after the bricks and mortar had crumbled, long after the last patient had been treated, long after my name had faded from memory. A legacy of courage, of boundaries maintained, of dignity preserved, a legacy truly my own.